Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Talk to Brazil is a leading business podcast, talks up with business experts throughout the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American known as the king of networking, connecting people from my studio in Brazil. Today's guest is Natalia Gindler Corsini, a global corporate compliance expert, joining us from Florida in the United States. Natalia Gindler Corsini is founder and managing director, strategic compliance and risk advisor at Prae Venire Compliance, also in Florida, advising and supporting multinational corporations on the design, construction, and administration of national and global compliance and risk management structures. So, Natalia, in your experience throughout the Americas, what are the challenges you see in compliance program implementation?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for having me. First of all, it's the failure to assess and understand the risks. So when we're entering a new culture, a new country, or a new business, sometimes it's a challenge if you don't know the risks of that country, culture. So it's very important to understand the culture and the mindset of that region. So not assessing the risks and understanding the risks is one of the problems. So another thing that is very important, and sometimes, many times there are some problems with that, is the lack of leadership. So the tone at the top, it's crucial. If the company doesn't have the support of the leadership support, this is going to be an issue, and the compliance program will not be well implemented. So people will not embrace the compliance culture. Also, insufficient resources. So if they're not tools, materials, systems, automation, this is another problem that one is going to face. Also, it's very important to have clear what the compliance function is. So what compliance is.
Who's the boss, right?
Right, exactly. So what the importance of that role. So having a chief compliance officer, it's a real chief compliance officer, and not the one that is the human resource director or the CFO being the chief compliance officer. That doesn't work.
But I want to interrupt you, but that's what I see happening more often, that it is let's call it a shared function, and not necessarily shared within the same funnel, let's say, in any company. And you said it could be in HR, it could be in finance, it could be in manufacture.
Oh yeah, but that's a problem. The problem there is the conflict of interest. So HR, they have their issues, finance, they have their issues, and also manufacturing and other areas and other departments. So they having an independent professional, it's much more it's safer,
right,
for the company. So we're would avoid conflict of interest. Usually, for small companies and medium-sized companies, there's no way to have a compliance officer role, and sometimes they have to consider sharing roles. So this is something that it happens,
right.
and it has to be treated in a way that the function cannot, like the minimum of conflict of interest has to be considered that. So that's why it's important to have someone helping in this implementation. So someone looking from the outside and to help the company to pick the right function to add the compliance officer role.
So, well, basically what you do then is, and bringing back to the size. So large corporations who have a structure are trying to evaluate their structure. That's part of what you do as an outside person, come in and take that overview and look. Medium-sized companies that, as you mentioned, may have to share responsibilities and functions. But I also see that you work and you orient startups. And one of your articles is why a startup needs compliant program. And the startups that I know, you're talking maybe of 3 or 4 people, maybe one person. And,
oh yeah,
so how do you bring all that down? How do you make that bite size for the smaller companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. Startups, when they start their business plan and they start building the company before having it in their operation, and they have to consider they should. It's not something that is that common, but they should consider having at least a consultant. So starting with a consultant, it's going to be a win for the startup. So compliance programs are especially important at startup companies because the best time to implement one is when you start a business. So we don't have to adapt the program to the culture. So it's going to the program will work with the startup. So a compliance program helps educate employees on laws, ethical business behavior, requirements applying to them, and what they can do to efficiently comply with them. So a compliance program is easier to implement upfront.
Right.
As there are no other systems in everyone's mind, which creates a culture of corporate compliance from the beginning. It also protects the business future as it helps mitigate potential risks, particularly ones of the company is completely unaware of. Impress clients, attracts reliable investors, and third parties.
Well, you mentioned now investors, and when we talk about compliance, and back to the startups, and what I've seen here in relationships with companies from Europe or the States, and here specifically in Brazil, these companies are looking into startups, looking to innovation, what's happening. It's a way they interpret the soundness of a company here. So for a startup to have and show right up front that they either have a program in place or they have a consultant that's helping them, that's one of the key issues that I've seen. It's part of the checklist that investors look at. They may like your idea. They're going to talk about the market. They're going to talk about how you're going to structure yourself. But fundamentally, and this specifically I see stronger coming from European companies, compliance issues and risk mitigation, as you mentioned, it's at the top of their list. They want to see that up front. Other cultures from other countries may not do the same, but the Europeans seem to be stronger in their view, speaking of investors, when they're looking at companies that are starting up. Or M&A, it may be a middle-sized company like you're saying, that maybe they want to to divest. I mean, they want to associate themselves with somebody. But compliance is always an issue.
Oh yeah, yes. So I'm glad you're saying that you have been seeing that, because here in the U.S. I don't see that much, and what I have seen, and it's in the media. We say like startups failing, and like 5 years or 8 years after they grow a lot very fast, and all of a sudden something happens, and this is like the hell for for all the investors. And this is typically because they didn't have a compliance program in place. They didn't start with a compliance program, with a consultant guiding them on the basics. It's a small company, so they don't have to be like to have like a robust compliance program. It's the basics. So they didn't have the basics. So we can see Theranos, we can see FTX. So there are examples that they had no guidance.
Right.
So, and this is why I believe that any investor, it doesn't matter how much they have to invest, if they're like billionaires, that everyone should ask for, let me see your plans for compliance first. That should be mandatory, I think.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, because it's a cultural thing. And here we have obviously talking from Brazil, the understanding what compliance means. If you're talking to multinationals in Brazil, they have an understanding. If I'm talking to startups or smaller companies, they all say, yes, we're in compliance and everything's okay. But really what that okay means is different. And I agree with you, because maybe a U.S. company will look at it in one way. European companies, I've mentioned, looks at it another way. Asian companies may have a different perspective of what that's about. But since multinational and global companies, they're everywhere. So they really have to have some type of a backbone. Otherwise, they get lost, and that's why they do. The challenge comes from companies who may not be, they're evolving from national to international. And taking that step, and whatever nation, how international you want to be, if it's towards Europe or the United States or anywhere else, that step seems to be more complex for many companies.
Yes, correct. Yes. Mainly because of the mindset. So if it's a family-owned business, it's hard to convince the owner that it has to be put in place, because it's important to protect the business. It's not usually people think that compliance is going to be a barrier for their business. So here, and this is completely wrong. I'm glad that things are have been changing, but it's in a very slow pace. But it's still, I can see family-owned leaders and small, medium-sized leaders a little bit in an old-fashioned way to think. So they still think that it might be a barrier, or they think that it's not for them. So we don't need that. We are already protected. We have our procedures. We have our controls in place. They think they have. So why do big companies, global companies already have everything in place? Because in the past they had a problem.
Right.
So they have to they have that because they learned the lessons, and not only that, the programs are imposed by DOJ, by SEC. So that's the point. So what I try to tell business owners and leadership in general, that let's not wait for something to happen. Let's do something that is cheaper now, so you don't have to hire attorneys and to pay fines. It's something that it's much easier and cheaper.
Well, you brought up a point that's important. Exactly that, and that's the cultural understanding of why compliance is important. I mean, and what you said on the international side, some of the frameworks that you mentioned on your site and what you do, you say the FCPA, which is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So that's a law, right? Anti-money laundering, fraud harassment. These things exist, and they're on, they're legal challenges in different countries. In the United States, heavy. And you're going to get a lot of litigation. You're going to need a lot of money to prove or disprove. So that's a whole different thing. Some of those things don't happen in other countries. What you mentioned in family-run or owned businesses, also culturally, the Latin culture, across Latin America, most companies have been family businesses. And the Latin culture is that, it's a family. And it's running the business. They've been successful, and it spins off, and it grows with the family, having the family, and everybody becomes involved. If I look to Europe or to the States, family-run businesses, even in the States, they tend to form themselves as a corporation earlier on. They're still a family business, but they adopt a corporate structure. In Europe, it's similar. It's a family business, but it becomes a corporate structure. And within these corporate structures, they adopt the corporate guidelines. And one of those is compliance. Here, throughout Latin America, it's still the Sunday or the Saturday dinner table where business is run, and this is the way it's been, and this is the way it's going to be. And that's a challenge from here. There's the other side of Latin companies going to the States or Europe and wanting to establish themselves. That's the other side of the culture shock, where they don't realize that the impact of being in the States and setting up a company.
Exactly. I think the main difference there is the law enforcement. There's no law enforcement in Latin America. Just a little. Used to have in the past, and then there's no more. So the political environment, it's always changing. So people know there's no enforcement. So when they come, it's funny that because you mentioned that when they come to the U.S., they have to change their mind and have to adapt and to follow the rules and to do things that they don't do in their countries. Right. And this is the same. I do like it's a parallel. I was to compare with the traffic here. So you have to stop in the stop sign. You have to. People that usually Latin American people, when they come to the U.S., they follow all the rules that basically are the same rules that they have in their countries. But that's why my question is why they don't follow the rules there too, and only in the U.S. because of the law enforcement. They're afraid of the police officer, they're afraid of the SEC, the DOJ, because there's a law, and the law is going to be enforced. So that's the point. So it's hard for them to, if they don't have, I have seen that when they come to the U.S., when the business come to the U.S., they have to reinvent the business to adapt it to. So it's easier if you have a small company or medium-sized company that you have to have an IPO where you have to sell it in a way that to another company. If you have everything already set in your company in Latin America, it's much easier to attract those bigger companies because they will relate the culture, the way it is. It's much easier to for the merge when it had to be merged, and also if you want, if one wants to bring the company to the US and start new market and a new in a new country, it's much easier if everything is already implemented in a small organization.
Well, that would be the question. So you help companies on both sides of the highway. You will help companies from the States who want to come into Latin America, and then you help Latin American companies who want to go into the States. So is that the role that you play?
Correct. Yes. And also European I have a client in Spain, and so European companies the same, going to Brazil, I have been helping them as well.
Yeah, well, that's another drive. The European companies wanting to come here, and I've seen that, because even we tend to put Europe into one bag, but it's not. So you're talking the Spanish or French companies, English, German, Scandinavian, they each have their different cultural aspects of what we're just talking about. But that's your outreach. You can help companies from these countries try to understand how to work and then structure and then implement a compliance program.
Correct.
Now that implementation, at the beginning you mentioned leadership. What I've seen, and we see today, not only today, leadership within corporations, medium and large, has been something that has been divided. When we got into these different matrix type organizations where the leadership was sort of divided, even divided amongst countries. So if you have a global company, you may have part of the leaderships in Europe, another part of the leadership could be in the States. You could have local responsibility in each one of the countries here. That could be Brazil or Colombia or Argentina. How do you address that leadership? You know, I guess that may be the difficult thing. Who's the leader?
Right. Yeah. The leader is the one the main person who responds for all the legal issues, for so the one who is in charge of giving his or her face to the law enforcement when needed. So this is the leader. So leadership, it has to start with the CEO, with the board, depending on the country, depending on the company. If it's very important, the company and the CEO to be together in this, and then spread to the bottom of the pyramid, which is going to be directors, managers. So leadership, it's everybody: managers, directors, CEOs. All the C levels and the board. The board is very important too. So everybody, but starting with the main leader.
Well, you made a point there too. The boards and boards are becoming. I want to say I would say that they're having more responsibility than previous. Years ago, we would think that the boards, even though it had legal functions, it was pretty much orientation. Today, they're having a more visible responsibility for the companies and as board members. And even middle-sized and smaller companies are adjusting to the fact of having a board. I think that's also an advantage which many family-run companies haven't had. We're boards, independent, outside experts like yourself who can help them structure and also show the risks that they're actually running.
Exactly. And this is an example that we very recently we saw the lack of an expert in the board. It was that the Silicon Valley Bank, that there's no risk expert in risk role there and in the board. They used to have in the past, and then they for several years they removed that person, and this is something that the results are not. We can see the results now. So it's very important, because if there's only people concerned about the sales and the commercial side, right, and revenues, there's no one with sufficient experience, right, and knowledge to provide them at least advice. So I recommend this, I recommend that. They can. So this is very important to have on the board. And also I have been trying to here in the U.S. to find a way to convince HOAs to have that kind of experts. So it's very important. We have been having a lot of problems in HOAs here in the U.S., like board members or property manager that have been stealing from the communities.
Well, that was just for our listeners. The HOA is the Homeowners Association, right?
Correct.
In Brazil and other countries, we refer to those either a condominium.
Right.
Or persons who are elected, or companies who are elected by the owners to actually run. It can be commercial, residential establishment. And I agree with you, because even here in Brazil, things only come up when something's wrong. When you find out that somebody's been skimming the money, and then and even administrators. So what needs to be in place to be able to handle that and understand what the risks are? You mentioned the bank in the States. One of the things that even surprised me about that is that after the fact, we see that bank was a regional bank.
Right.
And being a regional bank, obviously it followed different guidelines for banking in the States. Even from where I am, I would have thought that all banks are the same and they have to follow the same rules. But what we found was that's not the case. Since it was a regional bank, it didn't follow the federal regulation. It didn't need to, first of all, and then it went under. So then people were surprised, where was the control? Where was the regulator? It didn't need those. So that's part of the wake-up call that people have gotten. So, if you're investing, if you're part of an investment, you really have to understand, to the points that you make, what are the regulations that handle that? And if it's a homeowners association, if it's a company, if it's a startup, risks are everywhere. And when you talk about venture capital, it's risk capital. They understand risks.
Right.
They just want to know, what are the boundaries?
Exactly.
And I think even within companies and what you're doing, we have to understand the boundaries and what are the conflicts of interest that you mentioned. Because that's general. I think conflicts of interest could just be natural within a corporation of different areas, and there's nothing illegal about that. Otherwise, you can have conflicts that are illegal. And so even understanding those simple words of what is a conflict of interest and how does that adapt to whatever it is, it comes back to where is the money being placed, and investors at all level. And if we're talking about investment companies, funds, we're talking about the family-owned business and the relatives around the dinner table. Everybody wants to know where's the control.
Exactly. Right.
So you got a lot to do, right?
Oh, yes. It's a challenge, which I like a lot. And it's something that I do believe that little by little, and I can see that especially in Latin America, that things are changing. So as much as people are like companies are looking for professionals like me,
Right.
I can see that the mindset is changing little by little.
No, and I agree, and I think you're in the right place to do that because Florida still has been, and still will be a massive crossroads of cultural companies and persons. And that's both ways. That's north, south, south, north. So you're in the right place at the right time. So,
Yeah, correct.
well, Natalia, how can our listeners find you?
So they can find me in LinkedIn. I'm LinkedIn. They can find me in my website, which is praevenireus.com.
And get in touch and find your help, right?
Yes, exactly.
Very good.
Happy to help.
So thanks again for sharing your time and experience.
Thank you so much, Tom. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay. And for our listeners, as I said, it's more information on LinkedIn. It's Natalia Gindler Corsini, Nathalia. Gindler's Gindler, and Corsini, Corsine. Find her on LinkedIn. And Prae Venire US is PraeVenireus.com. PraeVenireus.com. Thanks to all our listeners and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their site, focusmi.com. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to the world. So goodbye and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.